A few days ago, I made a short video introducing low-cost diversified index funds. In that reel, I explained that building wealth doesn't require picking the perfect stock. It starts with understanding simple concepts like low-cost diversified index funds. But a 1-minute reel can only introduce the idea. Today, I want to slow down and explain exactly what they are, why they matter, and how someone with little investing experience can get started. A lot of people hear the word investing and immediately think, I don't know enough about stocks, I don't have enough money, or I wouldn't even know where to start. But here's what I want you to understand today. You don't have to become a stock market expert to become an investor. In fact, one of the simplest ways an ordinary person can begin building long-term wealth is something called a low-cost diversified index fund. And today, I'm going to explain exactly what that means, why so many long-term investors use them, and how someone can actually get started. So, what exactly is an index fund? First, forget the complicated terminology. Imagine you wanted to invest in the stock market. You could try to figure out which individual company is going to perform well. Apple, Amazon, Microsoft. Some company you never even heard of, but there's a problem. Nobody knows with certainty which individual company will be a winner 10, 20, or 30 years from now. An index fund takes a different approach. Instead of betting your money on one company, an index fund can allow you to own small pieces of hundreds or even thousands of companies at the same time. For example, an S&P 500 index fund generally tracks an index made up of 500 of the largest publicly traded U.S. companies. So instead of asking which company should I pick, you're essentially saying, I want to participate in the growth of a large part of the market. That is diversification. Now, let's talk why diversification matters. Imagine you had 1,000 to invest and you put the entire 1,000 into one company. If that company struggles badly, your entire investment is exposed to that one decision. But if your money is spread across hundreds of companies, one company having a terrible year doesn't necessarily determine what happens to your entire investment. That's one of the fundamental ideas behind diversification. Don't make your financial future depend on one company. Now, diversification does not mean you can't lose money. Index funds rise and fall with the markets they track. There will be bad months, there will be bad years, and there can be major market declines. That's why money you're going to need next month, or money that belongs in your emergency fund, generally shouldn't be invested in the stock market. Investing is about long-term money. The next question is, what does low cost mean? This part is extremely important because investment fees can quietly eat away at your returns. Funds have operating expenses, usually expressed as something called an expense ratio. Suppose two investments produce similar results before expenses, but one charges substantially more every year, over 20 or 30 years. Those additional costs can compound into a significant difference. That's why when we're talking about index funds, I specifically say low-cost diversified index funds. Fees may look small when you see them as a percentage, but remember, money you don't pay in the necessary fees is money that stays invested and has the opportunity to compound. So, how do you actually get started? This is where people sometimes make investing more complicated than it needs to be. The first step isn't picking a hot stock. It's deciding what type of account you're investing through. For retirement, someone might have access to a workplace plan such as a 401k. Depending on their circumstances, they might also consider an IRA. And someone investing outside of a retirement account might use a regular taxable brokerage account. These accounts have different tax rules and purposes, so the right account depends on your situation. Once the account is established, you can look at the investment choices available inside it and determine whether there is an appropriate low-cost diversified index fund. And here's something beginners sometimes misunderstand. Opening an investment account isn't necessarily the same thing as investing the money. You can transfer money into an account and have it sitting there in cash. You still have to actually choose the investment you want the money invested in. One key question: how much money do I need to start investing? Here's what I don't want people getting discouraged. You don't necessarily need thousands of dollars before you begin. Depending on the brokerage and investment, you may be able to start with a relatively small amount. The bigger idea is developing a habit. Maybe you start with $25 a week. That's about $100 a month. The amount matters, but consistency matters enormously. As your income improves, perhaps you can increase it. The objective isn't how can I get rich next month. The objective is how can I consistently put money to work for my future. Now, let's look at why time is one of your greatest investing assets. Here's a simple hypothetical example. Suppose someone invests $100 every month for 30 years. They personally deposit $36,000. If that money earned a hypothetical average return of 7% annually, the account could grow to roughly $122,000. That's not a promise of what the market will return. Real returns fluctuate, and taxes, fees, and timing matter. But it demonstrates something extremely important. The investor did not deposit $122,000. They deposited only $36,000. Time and compounding did much of the remaining work. And that's why waiting until you have a lot of money before you begin can work against you. Your greatest investing asset isn't always the amount of money you have. Sometimes it's the amount of time you give your money. Now, let's talk about what happens when the market falls. This is where investing becomes emotional. When the market is rising, everybody feels like an investor. When the market drops 20%, suddenly people start thinking, I need to get my money out before I lose everything. But if you're investing for decades rather than next month, market declines are part of the journey. Historically, markets have experienced recessions, crashes, wars, inflation, and financial crisis. There is never a guarantee about future performance, but constantly jumping in and out because of fear can undermine a long-term investment strategy. That's why before you invest, you need to understand your time horizon and your tolerance for risk. So what should you take away from everything we've talked about today? So if you have always thought investing was something only wealthy people or stock market experts could understand, remember these basic principles. You don't necessarily have to pick individual stocks. You can diversify across many companies, keep investment costs in mind, invest money intended for the long term, deposit consistently, and give compounding something it desperately needs: time. Let me leave you with one final thought. Building wealth usually isn't one giant financial decision. It's a series of smaller decisions repeated for years. Last time, we talked about why earning more money doesn't automatically make you wealthier. This is one of the things you can begin doing with the difference. Learn. Start carefully. Stay consistent. And keep moving forward on your path to financial power.